Chaos Zero Nightmare is one of the best modern gacha games you can play right now. This is not a statement I'm willing to make lightly. I tend to not paint an overly positive picture of a particular game since it can come off as if I'm glazing it. But once in a while, you do play that one game that keeps you hooked with all the trademarks of a promising future ahead of it. This is a game I personally played for my own enjoyment for the past 4 or so months. I typically just play gacha games for a few months at a time, since I usually just get bored and move on to something else, then come back whenever I feel like it. CZN though was a weird exception. While it does follow some generic formulas that you'll see in any gacha game, the amount of unique things it does in the market really sets it apart. I also normally don't do long-form reviews of a certain game until they've passed the 1-year mark after they've launched. But after I've seen how the game gets maintained in the past 6 months or so, I think I have a pretty good idea on how everything is being handled. My name is Psyche, and how good is this gacha version of Slay the Spire with some Gunner elements? I'll be breaking down the core mechanics, progression, gacha, and overall game maintenance to let you know if Chaos Zero Nightmare is worth playing. I've made 2 videos so far on the game. While the launch of the game was somewhat shaky with weird mechanics and missing quality of life, the core concept of the game was solid. Chaos Zero Nightmare is developed by Smilegate, the same creators as Epic 7, arguably one of the pioneers of the PvP gacha game genre. The game didn't start out with a PvP mode, and the reason why it popped off so much back in the day was due to its insanely high quality 2D animations. This was slightly before the era of Genshin Impact, so compared to what was out there at the time, a lot of people were drawn in by it. You'll see the same style of animation in CZN too. The game launched globally in November of 2025, meaning that this video should be released at around its half anniversary. My first impression review of it at the time praised it for its unique roguelike gameplay, where you try to create and manipulate your deck of cards to store it as save data so you can use it for other modes. However, there were quite a lot of frustrating hindrances, making the roguelike more of an additional farming mode rather than a cool way to explore the game. Epic 7 also has a big focus on farming gear, and since it's a PvP game, your gear quality tends to matter a lot. Many players obviously don't like that, and a few of its elements have bled here too. Has the game solved any of these issues since then? Well, let's start from the beginning. So I'm not gonna bore you with the story. I think the average CZN player would tell you that it's just pretty mid. You're a self-insert captain aboard a giant spaceship called the SS Nightmare as you resolve certain conflicts in other planets. You send your operators down onto the surface and guide them to victory through trials and tribulations. You might have read all about the Owen NTR debacle, where this male character dared to have certain dialogues that insinuated relationships with your waifus. That's a definite no-no right there. Although, as I have detailed it in a video on my second channel, there were rumors and leakers that alleged the original story of the game was vastly different than what it is now, and it was due to the interference of the current director that caused the story to degrade to what it is currently. This was verified in an apology livestream, but the reason for the interference and what the first version of the game was are still unknown. From this, all players received 50 limited pulls as compensation. Breaking the fourth wall, this makes Owen the most powerful character in the game. I mean, I don't know anyone else so influential every player gets that many free pulls. Anyways, the event stories after that have been more or less just pretty mid as well. It's your generic trope where your harem of waifus all want your affection. There was an announcement to rewrite some of the early chapters, though I really don't know what they can do at this point. In any case, most people don't play this for the story. The gameplay is where it gets interesting. There's a reason I haven't gotten tired of it even after playing for a few months. At its core, it's a modified version of Slay the Spire. While the premise is similar to Moriman's, that it's somewhat the same concept, it does vary quite a bit. Assuming you have an existing team of 3 units, you draw 5 cards at the beginning of the turn, and you have 3 action points. You can play as many cards as you want provided you have enough AP. Enemies will generally telegraph their next attack, but unlike in Slay the Spire, they'll often have a card count limit before they make their move, so it's possible you get attacked before ending the turn. If you end the turn before the number reaches 0, then they'll just attack you anyways. Shields can protect you past your usual health limit, but will expire on the next turn, just like how it works in Slay the Spire. The same sometimes applies to enemies too, but I've seen most bosses just keep their shield. Some enemies have a Ravage bar, where if you deplete it, their action gets delayed slightly and you get 1 AP back. If you deal damage in the weakness element, then you deal more damage. And more is depleted from the Ravage bar. Every unit has a stress gauge, where you get more stress from just taking hits. If it's filled, that unit goes into breakdown mode, and you have to play a certain number of their bricked cards to recover. Every breakdown cuts your max HP by a third until you recover it. Sometimes you get a lucky streak and playing only one of their cards will cause them to recover, but you can also get unlucky where playing the same cards can inflict even further negative effects on you. Once recovered, you get a little bit of your health back, your other two units also decrease their stress levels, and the affected unit cuts the cost of their ego skill by a lot. The ego gauge fills as you play cards and progress the stage, and every unit has their own ego skill as well as a partner skill that they can equip, up to 6 in total. These skills can't actually be reused, so levels are not designed to go on for like 50 plus turns. The stress mechanic is a weird one because you can't really predict how well you come out of a breakdown unscathed. The game says that the stress distribution is random, but I really think one unit tends to get stressed more than others. You usually won't get into a breakdown in a normal stage since they don't go on for long enough, where the enemy does so much damage you would have just died before the breakdown can happen. This may be the normal gameplay loop, but the bigger picture lies in CZN's roguelike mode. In order to curate the decks you want your units to use in other modes, you have to get it through here. By default, every character has 3 basic cards and 5 unique cards. The unique cards that don't have a purple title can undergo 5 unique epiphany effects, which are further upgrades to that card in some way. You can preview these epiphanies, but when you get it during a run, then you pick from 3 choices. So it's possible you don't get the one you want. There will be ways to manipulate this RNG I'll talk about later though. There are many maps, but you'll start out with just the 4 cards of each of your 3 combatants. And gradually as you play, you'll get their other unique cards and add epiphanies to existing ones. You can get to these question mark nodes where you're presented an event and you can pick from options to get rewards. Some of them will require a dice roll, but this is more or less irrelevant since later on in the game, you get this hourglass currency that lets you just re-roll the dice. You can also use the currency to reset a turn back to the beginning or shuffle your ego skills. These refresh daily, so it's at least balanced so that you can't just keep spamming rerolls constantly. There's 2 floors of the dungeon, and you can quit temporarily if you want to continue the run at a different time at 3 certain checkpoints. Reaching the campfire node lets you rest to regain health, get a random common card to add to your deck, or meditate with gold to reroll an epiphany if you got unlucky. You can only pick one of these 3 actions per campfire. Sometimes you can also enter the shop to buy gear and common cards. The most important feature here is letting you remove a card from your deck. Any Slay the Spire player knows that cutting cards from your deck is extremely useful, since you're shredding the useless cards so you have a higher chance to draw the cards you want. Generally, the basic cards of a combatant are just really bad and should be cut if you're farming save data for them. Each character can equip 3 pieces of gear. These are exclusively obtained during the run, so you can't farm for them elsewhere. They have their own buffs and provide more attack, defense, and HP respectively. The common cards are a little weird. There's a giant pool of them in the game, but their place in the deck building meta is questionable. Given that you want more consistency to draw the cards you actually want, a good chunk of the common cards are just not very desirable. There are some that are instant picks, and some that are good only for specific decks, but a good amount of them are just too niche or not competitive enough. This trend does seem to change a little when we talk about a different game mode later on though. When you fail or complete the run, the decks you've made for each of the 3 units are finalized into save data. You can equip these to challenge other modes. There's a weird mechanic called feint memory that dictates how many changes you're allowed to make to your deck before it stops guaranteeing your changes. Every action you do, like removing a card, duplicating a card, getting common cards, will accumulate feint memory points, and a recent update now lets you track it during your run. If you exceed the limit, then it's random what changes will be finalized in the save data. So if you removed a card, then it's possible the game just adds it back. The limit is determined by the difficulty of the dungeon you entered, in which the harder ones will give you more. If a unit goes into mental breakdown, then it's possible you have to do this counseling minigame to recover their save data. It is possible to fail these, and there's some unique scenes for it, but I've never had it happen. I guess I'm just that good of a counselor. I'll be going through the majority of the other game modes later on, but this is the basics of how CZN works. You really get quite a large variety of possibilities in your runs, as there will be times where the stars align and you get a really cracked card upgrade. Even though this is a gacha game and you know the devs have an incentive to not give you tools that are too powerful, some of these card combos actually feel unfair, making you think that you somehow cheated the game for making something this powerful. If you ask me, I think turn-based gameplay, when done right, can have an even higher skill ceiling than real-time strategy or action brawlers. While there can be a lot of RNG in these games, how you control RNG to your favor can also be considered a form of skill. While CZN still falls into some of these traps of having turn limits as how you're graded, there's a lot more nuances to its gameplay that I'll talk about later. Aside from the save datas, the progression of the game is extremely unremarkable. It's not bad, just nothing out of the ordinary. The max character level is 60 with some ascension stages containing materials you have to farm for. There's different classes and they all have their own materials to farm for. But to be honest, I don't really notice much difference, so it's more or less just a category. The partners also have to match the class of a character to gain a passive effect. Hilariously enough, the low rarity partners were way too good when the game launched, to the point where 5 stars may not even be an upgrade. They caught wind of this and rebalanced the stats for the 5-star partners, so now they're definitely more impactful than the lower rarities. The Battle Pass 5-star partners have been purposely gimped to provide slightly less stats than the Gacha 5 stars. Still, I've been mostly using lower rarities and have never actually pulled for the signature partner of a character before, so you'll probably do just fine. These partners also have to be leveled to 60. There's a potential progression chart to increase the base stats of certain cards. Most of these are pretty useful, but the later upgrades are extremely expensive, requiring an insane amount of the elemental crystals, the weekly boss drops, and another limited currency to max out. Interestingly enough, there's only 2 weekly bosses in the game, and there hasn't been new ones added yet. You can only challenge them 3 times a week, but unlike your traditional farming stages, these can actually be pretty hard if you don't have the right team to tackle them. You don't need to clear it on the hardest difficulty, but given power creep does exist in this game sort of, you probably won't have much issues with them. The relics are the stupid part. The system is literally just copy-pasted from Honkai Star Rail. You have 6 pieces and 3 of them give random main stats. You obviously want to fish for the right ones as well as the substats. This is as annoying as you might expect, though throughout the time I played, I don't really have a lot of pieces that are truly that powerful. As long as you have the correct main stat and maybe some good rolls, you'll do fine. There are ways to manipulate this by crafting gear with this special token, but it's pretty rare. There is, of course, the character dupes that go up to 6. I have like all the 4 stars at max rank since they haven't made any new ones, and I doubt that's even in the works, but everyone else is at 1 copy only. The game does give out this special token that lets you gain the dupe level of any 5-star you want, and it goes without saying you want to save these for the limited characters. When you enter a non-roguelike stage, you'll have to select a save data for each unit. While there is the argument that this is also a form of RNG gearing, the state of the game right now lets you curate your deck pretty well. There's even a special token where you can change the epiphany effect of a card outside the roguelike mode. The system isn't that vertical in the sense that there's only one version of a unit's deck that's objectively the most powerful. Some of the card combos that exist are actually really clever. Some of them allow for niche comps and hidden synergies to emerge that can shake up your playstyle. One of the best compliments I can give to the system is that every unit feels like there's more than one way to play them. And playing the roguelike feels like a comprehensive game mode that actually tests your decision-making skills. You can spend stamina to farm for all the materials in the game. You can spend up to 5 times to get 5 times the rewards. But there's no sweep. Luckily, most of the farming stages are piss easy, so you can just leave it running for a minute to be finished. Unluckily, the autoplay AI in the game is really dumb. Don't try to auto the weekly bosses because it's likely you'll just lose. In a strategic environment, the AI just has no idea how your deck works and will just start tossing cards randomly. The roguelike mode also has its own meta progression system. You get more rewards and upgrade currency from just playing it. When a season is live, you generally want to clear it twice a week to max out your rewards. Some of the upgrades are actually pretty substantial, like a higher chance to get certain events or free rerolls in the shop. Now, this is where things get a little subjective. While it's true that there's a lot of variability in your runs, if you're someone that's strapped for time and just doesn't have the time to do 2 runs every week, then this could potentially be a negative. Up until the half anniversary, the amount of runs needed to maximize your rewards can take a little bit long if you don't already like the gameplay loop. There is a way to skip the roguelike mode now by simulating a run, but it doesn't do the best job and can cause you to not fully complete it. The half anniversary also brought another form of late game progression where you can increase the max level cap of a unit by having them repeatedly participate in the Chaos roguelike mode, so that'll probably keep you busy for longer. With that out of the way, it's time to embrace the gambling spirit of gacha gamers. By the devs' own admission, they stated that the gacha is designed behind Genshin's model, but maybe like 30% more generous. There's 4 stars and 5 stars in the game. 5 stars have a base 1% chance to drop, and the rate up is a coin flip. If you lose the first one, then you're guaranteed the second one. Pity does carry over. The partner banner has the same rate, but the rate up is a 100% guarantee. One big bonus I gotta give to them is that the characters that have had initial rate up banner will immediately enter the standard pool after it ends, so it's possible to get them if you lose the rate up. There's only been 2 truly limited 5 stars in the game at this point, but I gotta warn you, they'll be on average better in performance than the non-limiteds. And their dupe levels can be influential. I have huge respects for minimizing fear of missing out, so it's one of the reasons it almost made my top list of gacha games to recommend. Something else I want to talk about is that you might think that the 4 stars are just not good, but that's actually not true. A lot of them provide utility for certain comps and can even act as sub-DPSs. When the first limited character was released, the best in slot team was literally just 2 4 stars. I have most of them at max dupe level, but unfortunately, due to how much effort it takes to design a character kit while making sure nothing game-breaking happens, it's unlikely they'll release new 4 stars going forward, or at least at a very slow pace. It costs 160 Gamba crystals to pull once, and this leads to the overall monetization. For some disclosure, I buy the $5 monthly and bought the battle pass 2 times for its specific combat partners. I don't pull for dupes, so I've stockpiled a lot of stuff just playing normally and clearing out the events. I can fully clear all the content that gives meaningful rewards, and while I'd say the generosity is above average, the game isn't gonna shower you with free stuff, ignoring any special periods like anniversaries. I have all but 2 of the characters in the game at this point after accounting for the selectors, but luckily they're not very good, so I'm not missing out on much. The Battle Pass gives 5 different partners for you to choose from if you buy the premium track, and since launch, they've actually increased the rewards from this as some players complain about it. The rest of the stuff in the cash shop is just what you expect. I personally don't think these are worth buying for a low spender, but I guess you gotta appeal to the whales out there too. I would like to see maybe skins of certain characters, but it also means they will have to draw different art for the cards too. Speaking of which, let's talk about how the game is presented. The game has a 2D style of art, and while it's not particularly unique, Smilegate is known for making some very sleek animations like in Epic 7. If you reach Bond 10 with a character, you also get a unique lobby scene. This is where the Gooner aspects start to shine if you're into that. The story and event stories are voice acted, but again, these are not the main attractions for the game. The story is just kind of mid, but I do appreciate the effort put into some of those animated cutscenes. There's a third gacha banner that's for this ticket you use to turn a character's card into its live 2D version. You can pick any 5 stars rate up, then you roll using this alternate currency. You just get this occasionally through events and challenges. This obviously has no gameplay changes, but if you want to see your favorite units have animated cards, there you go. You can buy this in the monthly shop, and surprisingly, I didn't see a way to whale for this, so I guess everyone just get these at controlled amounts. Despite the in-game sprite just being static chibi avatars, I imagine designing a new character isn't as simple as some auto-battler gachas out there. In comparison to its closest competitor Morimen's, it's clear that the team's higher budget does make it visually more impressive. In addition to the unique card art and their live 2D versions, the ultimate and certain cards animations all look similar to what you'd see in Epic 7. There's also the matter of game balance. With an increasing roster size and how strategic you can get in games like this, I suspect that as the game continues, people will find ways to break the game with some broken combo that mixes 2 fringe characters together, and it might turn out to be a nightmare to balance. But hey, I'd be really curious what would happen if they would be forced to nerf characters. Speaking of that though, this leads to one of the main reasons I'd recommend Chaos Zero Nightmare. Once in a while, the stars align where a game has both a unique concept and the game behind it is receptive enough to improve upon the foundation. Exclaiming phrases like, "devs listen," and overly trusting in a development studio is not something I tend to do, because, in my opinion, you should never purely believe in the goodwill of a company, no matter who it is. These games are products that you can enjoy as a hobby. That's what gacha games are. However, I also do believe in a business making smart decisions to improve their product, and I am willing to say that the case of CZN is a textbook example of how to handle the development of a modern gacha game. Basically, everything I've criticized in my first 2 videos on the game have been addressed. Aside from the usual quality of life that should be in any modern gacha game, one major complaint I had was that the roguelike mode was like a glorified farming stage, where due to you needing good decks to tackle the other game modes, it was less about having fun reacting to decisions in an unpredictable environment, but rather how to min-max your run to get the best rewards to create that broken deck you want. While now, you can pick the combatant you want to duplicate a card for, where I used to just pick 3 cards at random. The meditate action during a resting node lets you re-roll the epiphany of a card for a small fee. Even when you're done with the run, there's a token that lets you manually select the epiphany of a card, though those are pretty rare. In my second video on CZN, there was an unintended interaction between several characters that let you infinitely play damage-dealing cards if you had the right deck. The game would actually start to lag because it wasn't able to keep track of all the cards being played. To fix it, they had a simple but risky solution. Nerf the characters. Nerfing characters in any gacha game is quite a gamble. It should only be used as a last resort when something is seriously affecting the quality of the game. Players can report the company for misleading products if it's not done correctly, since they're technically selling a version of the advertised character, but delivering another. A natural way for games to deal with this is to just make some kind of mechanic that hard counters certain strategies, or slowly wait for the game difficulty to match the power creep over a longer period. Now, they got off relatively unscathed from this case, as many players agreed that the nerf was justified, and players got reset tokens to refund the upgrade mats spent on these units if they choose not to use them after this. Smilegate got incredibly lucky that the broken units were 4 stars, because if they were SSRs, especially if they were limited, there would be hell to pay. This is what I mean when I say these types of games are quite hard to balance, and it's only a matter of time when something else like that slips through. In addition to having a decisive fix, something else I think is deserving of praise is the buffs of other underutilized characters, even the 4 stars. It's quite common for gacha games to buff older characters, sometimes tagging additional upgrades you have to farm for those buffs, but rarely will you see buffs to lower rarity units. Continuing what I said in the gameplay section, a lot of the 4 stars in the game are actually pretty good, with the exception of a few. They didn't have to buff the 4 stars, but they did, and I think that's pretty honorable. Another major worry I had was that the game would fall into the trap of only having turn limits as the basis of the endgame, where you get more rewards for clearing a stage in less turns, so any unit that can't help you do that is just objectively weaker. I'll go through all the game modes now, as well as ones they've only added recently. The structure of updates follows seasons. Each season is split into 3 segments, where they will have their own roguelike mode that puts a spin on the usual formula. Each season lasts for around 2 months, with a buffer patch between the next one. Season 1 focused on the exhaust mechanic and finding this unique node that lets you pick more rewards. Season 2 was about cheating out big cost cards and the arena node that lets you tag additional passives onto your gear. Season 3 has the theme of these persona cards that can be modified. As you can see, they all have different flavors of gameplay, but something they tend to do is shield the units that were on rate up that season to be especially compatible with some of the late game modes. I'll start with the weaker ones. The Basin is literally just Memory of Chaos from Honkai Star Rail. You have to prepare 2 teams, and your score based on the number of turns you took to win. There's elemental weaknesses, and certain teams will gain advantages over others. This is as generic of a late game mode as you can get. You better have some good save data though, because you don't want to draw any bad cards as the scoring is based on the turn count. To be fair, I've been fully clearing this every rotation, so as long as you're like a month or so into the game with 2 decent teams, you should be fine. Though I argue this isn't the worst offender of the turn limit requirement. The Great Rift is often seen as the ultimate shield for the on-banner raid-up. There's a seasonal boss, and you also prepare 2 teams, but the latter half very clearly favors the season mechanics or whichever shiny SSR is on the gacha. You're scored based on how much damage you dealt in the turns allotted, and this mode does have a leaderboard. Most of the rewards aren't anything special, but you do get a unique badge you can display on your player profile if you reach certain thresholds. I imagine this is meant to incentivize the whales to push for the higher limits, while the lower spenders can just coast by while getting the important rewards. Anyways, not a fan of this, but I partially understand why a mode like this has to exist in a gacha game. Had only these 2 game modes existed for the duration of the game's launch, I would have just labeled the game as pretty good, but not exactly deserving of being called the best in its class. With the mediocre modes out of the way, this is where I'll start praising the development team for coming up with other ways to play that's genuinely fun and breaks the norm of most gacha games. The first is this tower mode. This is an endless stream of challenging levels you can try at any time. How it works is that you have to complete 5 encounters back to back, which accounts for 5 levels in the tower. The trick here is that enemies take weakness damage from all the elements, and there is no turn limit. The priority now becomes surviving enough turns to reach the end. Now that the goalpost isn't an arbitrary turn count, suddenly, units that give defense are a lot more useful. In the later stages, it's not unusual for a round of enemy attacks to deal half of your health bar. Now you can focus on stockpiling shield points and staying alive. As long as you can clear it, you get the rewards. This mode has over 100 stages at this point, so you'll be in there for a while coming up with ways to beat it, alongside some cosmetic rewards if you do make it far. Another place of lost potential is the roguelike mode. As said before, once you do it a few times, it becomes a glorified farming stage to farm for good decks. Well, there's now another way to play it. This was first introduced as a temporary event, but now it's an actual mode. The main difference is that you can't actually obtain save data in this special version of the roguelike. In the first iteration of the event, it would have a special meta progression system where you can feed it your old save data from characters to unlock these buffs that can help you out during the run. The fact that it had no save data to worry about means you're not really trying to curate the deck of one specific character, but rather to make the entire deck as consistent as possible to win. The mentality switch mainly changes how you make decisions during the run. Event options that transform your basic cards into random common ones might actually be pretty appealing, since the common cards are very likely to be upgrades to your basic ones, but it doesn't really matter which one you get since you're just trying to win here. The real potential comes from the sortie mode that expands on this formula that was recently released. This is the truest sense of a roguelike mode the game has done. You will begin the run with a single combatant, and add a second one randomly selected out of 3. It's possible that a character you don't have will appear, but their stats will be adjusted to ensure they're still powerful enough. Instead of epiphanies, you'll select new cards with randomized modifiers to be added to your deck, meaning that it's more about dealing with what the game gives you rather than what you think you want. There are 3 floors in the sortie dungeon instead of the normal 2, and on the 3rd floor, you can add a 4th combatant to your team with only 2 of their unique cards. This is where decision making and knowledge of the game actually start to matter. You'll want to draft a combination of defense, utility, and certain synergies to have a shot at winning. You can turn on a hard mode for the run, and this is where things get pretty dicey. You have to be pretty knowledgeable about the game to have a shot at winning, and while you don't get anything major for beating it on the hardest mode aside from some achievements, you do get more event currency used for the meta progression. This mode is where units that don't contribute to damage come into play, as they become more crucial to surviving some of the later encounters. And since you're not restricted by faint memory, you may find yourself picking common cards that you haven't used before. You've likely have noticed that a lot of gacha games try to implement a roguelike mode. I believe the reason for this is to create the illusion where the game can be played indefinitely, as every run will feel different without the devs needing to put any curated content within it all the time. Just the framework of the roguelike itself is enough to keep players busy for a while. There's a reason why a game like Slay the Spire gets played for hundreds of hours and people will still not find it boring. I brought up the same argument in my Morimen's video, but while most of them are fun distractions, they usually don't offer that much in terms of actual meaningful content. Now, I'm not gonna defend CZN here, as the gacha direction of the game has clearly shifted the Slay the Spire formula to fit mobile gaming interests. The modes that do rely on clearing within certain turn limits and seasonal buffs to 5 stars are clearly present, and are meant to incentivize you to possibly spend to compete on the leaderboard. At the same time, I think the directions they've taken to expand the game modes have made it so that how good a unit is will rarely be so black or white. Many defensive units that don't do damage may become really good in certain other game modes. And in my opinion, if you have a lot of people disagreeing on tier list placements, that's generally a good thing. The game is currently at its half anniversary. I don't like to quantify the rewards given out, since I think there's much more to a game than just the free pulls. But they are giving out like 2 selectors and 1 for combat partners. This is a pretty good time to get into the game, and I'm not even being paid to say this. But I mean, if Smilegate wants to sponsor me, hey, my DMs are open. This past 6 months has shown me how I think a gacha game should be developed in today's age. You first come up with a solid concept. The game doesn't need to be perfect, but you want a good starting point to iterate on. Once you figure out the basics to improve the game where you like it to be, that's when you start implementing game-changing mechanics or new ways to play. Overall, I'm quite impressed, and again, while I don't like to believe a company is perfect, they have been doing a fine job maintaining the game. KL0 Nightmare is an example of a gacha game that had a promising foundation which has been expanded upon in a meaningful way. The game hit the ground running as the initial popularity and financial success kicked off strong, and while it's natural that a game would have a fall-off period, they've refined it to the point that I'm very impressed by. I think people should never put unconditional trust in gacha developers no matter how much they like the game, but as a product, CZN is very good. The roguelike deck building mode feels synergistic with the live service model, and with how seasons introduce different playstyles and focus on various aspects within the game, the mode itself feels meaningful and engaging. The story, if you ask me, is mid at best and all over the place, but they did announce the rewrite is coming this July, so at least we can see what they'll do. I don't have high hopes, but it's something. You have some generic RNG gearing, as well as biased endgame modes that do shill for the newest rate-up character. But that's obviously ignoring the amount of good stuff the game has done as well. This game is currently closely tied with what I consider as the best gacha game with turn-based gameplay, and it's one I have no problems recommending, assuming you're fine with spending an extended amount of time farming for good decks, and welcome the extra sprinkle of fan service on top. In any case, this has been my experience with CZN for the past 4 or so months, so let me know what you think. I'll likely be sticking to it for the time being, and it's one that has kept me entertained for some time. If you want to catch more gacha-related content like this, subscribe to the channel. You can support for as little as $2 a month on Patreon. And I've started to share occasional early access to new videos, so you never know. In any case, as always, thank you for watching, be sure to spend moderately, and have fun out there.